about the people's budget and excited to talk to you not only about some of our findings, but also about what it is, right, that people in Los Angeles want to see. So before I dive into methods, before I dive into how we collected our data and the type of data to be collected, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge some of our partners and some of the folks who also conducted similar surveys prior to this, as well as some of the advocacy work that had taken place right around budget work here in Los Angeles, specifically when we talk about law enforcement. Again, Black Lives Matter has been challenging the spending of law enforcement since 2015, and I want to make sure to make this public, and I wanted to paint this picture for you all right before we dive too deeply. When we walked in here, we were greeted by law enforcement. Law enforcement brought us to the back room. In addition to that, law enforcement also took our temperatures, right? These are things that, we would typically ask healthcare professionals to do, or all of you have staff, right? Staff members would do, right? But again, when we have this disproportionate rate of spending of law enforcement, that's one of the things that happens is they get tasked to do things that, quite frankly, they shouldn't be doing, right? In addition to that, right, these organizations that you see on the screen in 2011, the Youth Justice Coalition did a survey of 2,600 folks, right? And they found that people wanted increased investment in youth development. People wanted increased investment in youth jobs, right? In 2017, Community Coalition did a people's poll where they surveyed over 4,000 people. And again, more people wanted increased investment in jobs, increased investment in resources, right? The coalition that, again, my day job, that I manage is the Brother Son Selves Coalition, which is a coalition of 9 organizations that do organize and work with boys and men of color in LA. And we surveyed 3,300 young people. And again, people wanted investment in jobs. People wanted investment in resources. People wanted investment in mental health, right? So if we keep saying the same things again and again, right, how many people is it going to take to get the message? So let's go there and let's figure out how many. So because of this organizing work, right, the People's Budget Coalition distributed the survey amongst their networks using a survey software called Qualtrics. Qualtrics is a specialized survey software where you're able to collect the data rapidly. You distribute it through a random link, through a text message, or from a website, and people can then take the survey either on their cell phones or on their computers, depending on how they got the link. Now, there were 33,000 people tried to take the survey, but there was a filter in the survey that only allowed residents in the city of Los Angeles to take it. And that's the 24,426 responses that we got. So just to let you know, people are eager. People are eager and willing, right, to engage in these conversations. Over 50 organizations helped to distribute this survey. And in addition to that, 3,300 people participated in the town hall, right, to further discuss what it is that the city of Los Angeles should be doing and how it should prioritize its money. So I'll let you know that a lot of people have done a lot more with a lot less data, right? To give you an example, at the end of 2016, right, with the presidential election, CNN surveyed 24,588 people. We surveyed 24,426, and that's local. That's people from here. That's people who have a say, who should have a say in what it is that their money, or what it is that their city spends money on. So I just wanted to go ahead and paint this picture for you, right, to figure out not only how the people can participate in budgeting, but also how they participate in larger public discourse. So we wanted to make sure that we got critical segments of the population, right? That we paid attention to race, that we paid attention to gender, that we paid attention to whether or not people were essential workers or whether or not people have been impacted by incarceration, right? So how does this 24,000 folks break down? right? So we had about 55% people of color take our survey. In our survey, we had just under 3,000 people who are experiencing housing insecurity, 6,700 people who are currently experiencing financial insecurity, and 3,000 people who are essential workers. In addition to that, nearly a third of people who took this survey are unemployed. The majority of them are unemployed because of COVID. Nearly a third of folks identify as LGBTQ, and over 2/3 of the people who took our survey identified as female or cisgender women. Now, when we start breaking things down by the LA City Council districts, right, these are the numbers of people. Some of these districts are yours, right, and these are people oftentimes who are the most highest propensity voters, right? So understand that we are not just surveying random folks. These are your actual constituents who are saying these things, who are saying what it is they want to invest in. Then here's a list of the top zip codes, and now we're going to start diving into the findings. So overwhelmingly, the call was that we wanted to invest in universal needs and divest in traditional forms of policing. To give you an example of what this looks like, 45% of people wanted to invest money in things that we call universal aid and crisis management. 27% of folks wanted to invest in things for the built environment, right? So investing in our roads, investing in our parks, investing in the things that we know keep our city lively and functioning. And finally, 25% of people wanted to invest in reimagine community safety. So instead of us, when we first walked in the room, being greeted by law enforcement, what would it look like if we were greeted by other folks? What would it look like if we were greeted by community care workers? What would it look like if we were greeted or we had our temperatures taken, right, by people who were health workers for the city? Not people with guns who could take my life. And then when we asked people if they wanted to invest in law enforcement, 1.6% of the people who took our survey said we need to make sure that we put money into law enforcement. Now, I want to make a distinction here that when we first distributed this survey was before George Floyd, that weekend before. And then as people kept taking the data, who were inspired by this particular moment, right, what happened? We started to have broader conversations about what it is public safety is and what it is public safety could be. And we know, right, not only from that video we saw, but the thousands of other people who have been killed by law enforcement, that there is a different version of public safety available, which led to this 1.6% number. And I want to be clear that this is the voices of 24,000 people who are in the city of Los Angeles who took this survey. And as the administrator on this particular survey, we get surveys every day. This is the data as of Friday. This doesn't even include this weekend. Just to make sure that we have an understanding of how many people are engaging in this process. Now, when we say universal aid, when we say built environment, when we say reimagine community safety, when we say law enforcement and policing, what are we talking about? What is that? Right? So we defined it and wanted to make sure that we provided, a quick breakdown of some of these things, right? So when we talk about universal aid and crisis management, right, we're talking about the city having its own fund to discuss emergency preparedness, right? So when we have situations like COVID, we should be financially ready for them. It shouldn't be something that comes out of the blue, right? We should be talking about food security. Right, there were a number of people in the city of Los Angeles, right, who couldn't afford to eat, who couldn't afford, right, to make sure that they could feed their families, and they had to make decisions between rent and whether or not they were going to eat that month. Now, I know that city council, that other folks have done things around moratoriums on evictions, right, but I'll tell you right now that when we're talking about the people and their financial security, That's something that the city should be invested in, because when you have people who are financially secure, you have a city that's financially secure. In addition to that, we surveyed folks around reimagine community safety. So we talked about this as investing in restorative justice methods, right? We talked about this as investing in community care workers, as investing in community investment in neighborhood empowerment, right? What would it look like to empower our neighborhoods and communities? We also talked about what it is to invest in mental health and wellness, right? Especially now that people are socially distant, especially now, right, that we're not allowed to be close together as we normally are. We initially were told that we couldn't sit 5 at this table, and that was stressful. Imagine, right? People who rode together, who walked in together, can't even sit together to address this particular council. Again, stress. And then finally, when we start talking about the built environment, public works, public transportation, investing in libraries, investing in the things that we know, right, help to keep a community whole, help keep a community safe. Now, we also ask people about, are there any areas that we shouldn't be investing in? Are there any areas that we should take money from? And that's what the graph looks like. Virtually no one wanted to take money away from the things that we know are positive. Public health, safety, child and youth development. Now, my question to you all is, how is it that this is what the people want to invest in, and then this is what the people don't want to invest in, yet these are the things that get cut first, while law enforcement, policing, those budgets continue to inflate? How is it that our budgets do not match the will of the people? So, as we're talking about, right, what it is that the people need, just want to make sure that we drive this point home. Universal aid and crisis management. What would it look like if LA was prepared for this particular crisis? What would it look like if instead of law enforcement shooting people with rubber bullets and tanks, we used some of that money, right, and we used it to invest in the protective equipment for our city workers and the protective equipment of the essential workers who are on the front line? What would it look like if we had that type of infrastructure already in place? What would it look like if we had the infrastructure, right, to support those who were the most vulnerable? We know that we can support people who are homeless, right? It just wasn't any political will. Well, now is the time to be bold. In addition to that, right, talking about built environment, right? So again, I grew up right around the Crenshaw area, right, off Florence and Crenshaw. It is a struggle. All parts, right, especially where there are disproportionate amounts of black people, right, you don't see the same type of infrastructure that you see in other parts of the city. One of my good friends, Justin Marks, he used to say this thing, that when he worked in the city of Inglewood, it didn't necessarily feel safe, but there were a lot of police around. But when he started working in the Wilshire area, there weren't a lot of police around, but it felt safer. And he would say that police don't make communities feel safe, resources do. So what does it look like for us to have the resources and the built environment that reflect that we care about that community? Again, we're welcoming and we're inviting City Council to imagine what this looks like with us and to invest in that. And then finally, reimagine community safety. I'll say this right before I close. My mother and my father, right, of course, struggled. They struggled like a lot of parents struggle with domestic violence, with trauma, with harm, things that oftentimes were very challenging with growing up. And a lot of times the police got involved. My mother and my father, the police never helped the situation. It escalated the situation. Somebody always went to jail. Somebody always was locked up. Either it was my mom for being an aggressor, or either it was my dad for being an aggressor. And because of that, right, it broke my family apart, and neither one of my parents are alive today because of the stress that they experienced, because we weren't able to work out our issues, and because we don't invest, right, in family therapy. We don't invest in restorative justice. What would it look like if instead of, police officers coming to take my dad away, right, or police officers coming to criminalize my mother, right, for her mental health issues, what would it look like, right, if we had mental health workers who came to support that? What would it look like if we had people who cared about the community to do restorative justice work, to heal the harm? I'm blessed to be sitting in front of you a year away from getting my PhD. But there are a lot of people who grew up in a very similar situation that I did who are not here because of that same trauma, because of those same issues. But you all have the power and the ability to make a new Los Angeles, to make a new Los Angeles that protects little black boys like I was, protects little black girls like my sister. So again, our top priorities for investment are housing security, our mental health and wellness, our public health and healthcare. We want you all to invest in a healthy city, to invest in a healthy Los Angeles, and you have the power to do that. And we know that we spend way too much money on law enforcement. Again, as a nonprofit professional, right, one of the things that they tell us is that when your budget gets to $2 million, your organization has now reached sustainability. You want to know what else is a line item for $2 million? How much money the LAPD spends on printers. On printers. That's how much money they spend on printers and ink. And you mean to tell me that's the same budget that can have an organization like the Social Justice Learning Institute, like Inner City Struggle, like some of these other organizations that get acknowledged for doing great work, right? You mean to tell me that that's the same budget that they have to hire staff and to go out there and do good in the community? When we say that we need divestment, right? We're saying that we need divestment, and we're saying that we need investment because we know that there are people, that there are organizations, that there is an infrastructure out there that needs to be supported in order for us to fundamentally transform what the city looks and feels like for everybody. So with that being said, I just want to make sure, right, that you all saw this data. Again, I want to thank my comrades with Black Lives Matter Los Angeles, with Build Power, with the People's Budget Coalition, and I'm excited, right, to have this conversation because I think now is the time, right, for change. If you ever wanted to know, or if you ever wanted to feel what it would feel like to be an elected official during the Civil Rights Movement, now is your opportunity, right, to do the right thing and to be on the side of justice. Thank you.
I'm not good at technology, but I just pressed this little button.